Let me show you how to build this outdoor storage bench with just 7 2x4s. To begin this project, I'm over at the miter saw and I'm going to be cutting the 2x4s that are 25 inches long for the front and back panels. You're going to need about 6 of those. So I'm using my measuring tape, marking them at 25 inches, and let's cut them. So now you have this 25-inch long piece, and instead of measuring each individual piece, you can just take the one that you just cut, lay it on top of the 2x4 to mark your next cut. Okay, I have all 6 of the 25-inch pieces cut, so now I'm going to cut the 2x4s for the side panels, and they are 10 inches long, and I'm going to do the same thing here at the miter saw. One way that you can make this task a little bit easier and to produce consistent cuts is to use a scrap piece of wood as a stop block. So I've got this piece of 2x4 here that's cut to 10 inches, and I'm going to butt this up against it, and then I'm going to clamp this into place. So every cut that I make now is going to butt up against this stop block, and it'll reproduce 10-inch pieces. So now what I'll do is I'll put a next piece on, butt it up against it, hold it down and cut it, and that way you'll have 10-inch pieces every time. Butt it up against it, make your cut. Wait till your saw stops before you move it, because you don't want to take a chance and move your stop block. I'm going to reposition the stop block to 17 inches, and then I'm going to cut 8 pieces for the feet. And to save some time, I'm not going to show me cutting it because it's the same as the other 2 panels that I cut. All right, let's do a quick inventory. I've got the 4 legs right here. I've got the side panels, and I've got the front and back panels over here. Before we start to join all this together, we're going to briefly talk about the construction methods for these legs. And they're going to be going together like an L-shaped, like this. But since we don't want this board to be wider on one side than it is on the other, so if we just butt these two 2x4s up together like this, you'll notice that this side is wider than this side because you got the thickness of the 2x4. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one of these 2x4s down 1.5 inches in width to make it 2 inches wide, because the 2x4 is not 2 inches by 4 inches, it's 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. So to make these square, or at least pretty close to square, we're going to rip one of these 2x4s down to 2 inches. Now when you're done cutting these, don't get rid of these scraps, because 2 of these cutoff pieces here we're going to use for cleats on the inside where the shelf lays on. So I figured before I went ahead and screwed all these together, I'm going to go ahead and pre-finish this with a deck stain. This is a Super Deck Sherwin-Williams. It's in the English walnut semi-solid color. Figured while I have access to everything, I might as well go ahead and pre-finish it. To apply the deck stain, I just used a real cheap synthetic brush, and since this is water-based, when you're done applying the first coat, just rinse it out with water and let it dry, and you can reuse this same brush for the whole project. The first 3 sides are dried, so I'm going to go ahead and flip them over, and I'm going to apply a coat on this one side that I couldn't get. Now that everything is finished, I'm going to go ahead and start constructing the legs. I'm just using this simple $39 Craig jig. Since these pieces are a little bit smaller, I have the Craig jig set to 7/8, and I'm using 1.5 inch screws. And I believe I have the drill bit also set to 7/8, but you want to do a couple of practice pieces to make sure. With your leg lined back up, just to make sure that it's flush on the top and bottom. Put a clamp to hold it into place on each end. And using these 1.5 inch screws, just go ahead and screw them together. So I've gone ahead and readjusted my Craig jig to 1.5 inches, and I've done the same with the drill bit. And I'm also going to be switching back over to 2.5 inch screws. So each of these stretcher pieces are going to receive 2 screws on each end. So I'm going to clamp the jig into place and actually drill in both of these holes. So I'm going to come to the end, take the quick clamp, clamp it into place, and just like before, clamp the board down to my workbench so it doesn't move. So each stretcher will have 4 screws, 2 in each end. All right, so now we're ready to actually start assembling this. I've got the stretcher in between 2 legs here, and I'm going to use this quick clamp here to make sure that it stays into place while I get the screws in. So you want to make sure that it's flush on the top here. Stretch the clamp out and double check. And I'm using these 2.5 inch screws again, like I mentioned earlier. Now the first one's in. I've cut a 1 inch piece of scrap here to use as a spacer. So I'm going to put it below this top stretcher, take the next leg and butt it up and screw it in. So I'm going to pop the spacer out, put it below the last one, slide it into place. May need to use a mallet. And there's one side. I paused it here to show you that I put the legs on backwards, I guess, on the back one. As you can see here, the legs are on different orientation on the front and back panels, but it's no big deal. I'm going to go ahead and use the Craig jig once again to put the 2 holes in each side, just like I did here. And then we will go ahead and attach the side panels. And with that in there, I've cut this 1 inch spacer a little bit shorter so it can fit in between. Slide it up. Remember those cutoffs I told you to save? Well, now I'm cutting those to 14 inches for the bottom cleats that the shelf set on. And while I'm at the chop saw, I cut 3 of these boards at 29 inches for the bottom shelf. And while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and measure for the top, make sure that all of the pieces that I have on the plans are accurate, and if not, adjust those. And I'm going to go ahead and cut all of the pieces that are left and then pre-finish them before putting them on the cabinet base here. The first thing that I cut on the top are the 17 inch, I guess, fake breadboard ends. And then I measure and cut 25 inches for the other 4 stretchers that make up the top. And just like before, I went ahead and pre-finished these pieces, and I just wanted to mention that I put a total of 2 coats on the whole piece. To attach the cleats, I pre-drill and put a total of 3 screws in each cleat. I pre-drilled and screwed in 2 screws on each side of these bottom shelf pieces. And I've got a 3/4 inch piece of scrap to help with the spacing. When it came time to space the center shelf board, I switched back to the 1 inch scrap, but on the outside 2 pieces I used a 3/4 inch scrap piece. To connect the stretchers to the breadboard ends, I'm putting 2 holes in each end of the stretcher. And finally, it's time to assemble the top, and I make sure that it's flush and use this long quick clamp before I screw in 2.5 inch screws. And like before, I'm using this 1 inch spacer in between each of the stretchers. When it came to the last stretcher, I did not use the 1 inch spacer. I lined it up with the ends of the breadboards because that's more important than the 1 inch gap in between each of the stretchers. I kept it pretty simple on the hinges. I just used some gate hardware that I picked up at Lowe's. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the build. I have the free SketchUp file and plans over on my website, SimpleCove.com, but you can find a link in the description below. Hit the thumbs up button if you liked it, share it with a friend, and let me know what you think. I'll see you in the next build video.